Now here to share some stories with you all, please welcome American mountain man Jim Bridger. Thank you.
Oh, for a muse of fire that would ascend the brightest heaven of invention, a kingdom for a stage, princes to act, and monarchs to behold the swelling scene. Welcome. This here's Fort Bridger. Here you'll be able to rest up and resupply for the remaining legs of your journey out to Oregon. You have any questions now about what to take with you or where you're supposed to go next, you be sure to come and ask old Gabe. And for those of you that don't know, that's me. Bridger's the name. Jim Bridger. You see, I built this here fort. Well, hence the name Fort Bridger, huh? Anyway, now that I have you all gathered up, I'd like to take advantage of such a fine audience by sharing some stories with you all to help you relax a bit. Oh, and I realize some of you may have heard coming down the trail that old Jim's stories ain't nothing but tall tales and lies, and well, that being the case, I learned me some new stories in my time here, thanks to that, well, now, where did he go? Thanks to that little one running around here someplace. These here stories were written by a feller by the name of William Shakespeare, but I just like to call him Old Bill. It's much easier that way. These here stories are my favorite, as Old Bill talks about the 7 ages of a man's lifetime, and well, I reckon I like them so, because I darn near lived every single last one of them, probably on age about 4 or 5 myself. So here we go, the 7 ages of a man's lifetime by Old Bill Shakespeare. All the world's a stage and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and in one man's time he plays many parts. Now I can personally attest to that last statement about playing many parts as I look back on my days, as a blacksmith apprentice as a boy back in the United States, to my days as boatsman, an explorer, fur trapper, a trader, a chief of the United States Army Scouts, and well, even running this here fort. But enough about me, back to Old Bill, shall we? And in one man's time, he plays many parts, his acts being 7 ages. At first, the infant, mewling and puking in the nurse's arms. And then the whining schoolboy with his satchel and shining morning face, creeping like a snail unwillingly to school. And then the lover, sighing like a furnace with a woeful ballad made to his mistress's eyebrow. Now, folks, when I look back on my days here on earth, I can honestly say I've never considered myself to be much of a lover, more of a fighter, or even a soldier, if you will. But wouldn't you know, Old Bill's got himself a fella just like me, goes by the name of Benedict. I do much wonder how one man, after seeing how another man is made a fool when he dedicates his behaviors to love, will, after laughing at such shallow follies in others, become the argument of his own scorn by falling in love. Such a man is Claudio. Why, I have known when there was no music with him but the drum and fife. And now had he rather listened to the tabor and the pipe. Why, I have known when he would have walked 10 miles afoot just to see a good armor. And now does he lie 10 nights awake carving the fashion of a new doublet. He was wont to speak plain and to the purpose like an honest man and soldier, but now he's turned orthographer. His very words a fantastical banquet, just so many strange dishes. May I be so converted and see with these eyes? I think not, but I'll not be sworn, for love may transform me into an oyster. But I'll take my oath on it, until he's made an oyster out of me, he shall never make me such a fool. Why, one woman is fair, yes, I'm well. Another wise, yes, I'm well. Another virtuous, yes, I'm well. But until all graces be in one woman shall not come by my grace. Rich she shall be, that's certain, wise or all none, virtuous or I'll never cheapen her, mild or not high for an angel, of good discourse, an excellent musician, and her hair, well, her hair should be of whatever color it please God. Now, like I said, folks, Benedict was known better for being a soldier than he was a lover. And that, of course, would be the next stage of a man's life. Then a soldier full of strange oaths. Strange oaths, huh? Well, you look back on my days of Chief of Scouts for the United States Army, I can honestly say that to an outsider, in a time of battle or skirmish, myself and my fellow brothers in arms could easily have been accused of making a few strange oaths a time or two. But you know, it was once said, for those that fought for it, freedom has a flavor that the protected will never know. But when I think about all the words and strange oaths I've heard in battle, there's only one general who stands out amongst the rest. He's a fellow by the name of Henry, and he's leading his troops into battle this particular day, even though they're outnumbered about 5 to 1. We would not die in that man's company that fears his fellowship to die with us. This day is called the Feast of Crispian. He that shall see this day and live to old age will yearly on the vigil feast his neighbors and say, tomorrow is St. Crispian. Then will he strip his sleeve and show his scars and say, these wounds I had on Crispin's day. Old men forget, yet all shall be forgot. But he will remember with advantages what feats he did that day. Then shall our names, familiar in his mouth as household words, Harry the King, Bedford, Exeter, Warwick and Talbot, Salisbury and Gloucester, be in their flowing cup freshly remembered. In this story shall the good man teach his son, and Crispian shall ne'er go by from this day forward to the ending of the world, but we in it shall be remembered. We few, we happy few. We band of brothers, for he today that sheds his blood with me shall be my brother, be he ne'er so vile. This day shall gentle his condition, and gentlemen in England now abed will think themselves accursed they were not here, and hold their manhood cheap, whilst any speaks that fought with us here upon St. Crispin's day. And like I said, Henry and his boys were outnumbered 5 to 1, but you see, that didn't matter none, because they still walked off the battlefield victorious. And I like to think it had to do with old Henry being bearded like the par, jealous in honor, sudden and quick in quarrel, seeking the bubble reputation even in the cannon's mouth. And folks, I can honestly say I've never gone headlong willingly into the business end of a cannon just to save my reputation. But I have been known to stick my neck out a time or two because of some foul words somebody might have said about me. Old Bill wrote himself about another soldier who speaks about saving the reputation of a dear friend that had just been murdered. Oh, pardon me, thou bleeding piece of earth, that I am but meek and gentle with these butchers. Thou art the ruins of the noblest man that ever lived in the tide of times. Woe to the hands that shed this costly blood. For thy wounds do I now prophesy, which like dumb mouths do ope the ruby lips to beg the voice and utterance of my tongue. Fierce civil strife and domestic fury shall cumber all the parts of Italy. Blood and destruction will be so in use that mothers will but smile when they hold their infants drawn and quartered by the hands of war, and all pity choked of custom of foul deeds, with Caesar's spirit come hot from hell with the Tay by his side, shall cry havoc and let slip the dogs of war, that this foul deed shall smell above all the earth with carrion men groaning for burial. The last time I shared that particular piece, one fella in the front row here, he stood up and said, gosh, that fella Shakespeare sure knows how to spill the real stuff. Well, I think he's the only poet I've seen that was ever fed on raw meat. That particular soldier was a fella by the name of Mark Antony, and besides being a soldier, he was also a justice, round in belly, with good cape and line, a beard of formal cut, eyes severe, full of wise saws in modern instances, and, well, so he plays his part. Now, folks, I've never been elected to justice of the peace, and nor have I been able to preside over any hearing that would give me justice or revenge to one party or the other. But when it comes to seeking justice, that's something I do know a little bit about. You see, right here, in the summer of 1847, there was a fellow and his wife passing on through here to the Oregon territory to establish themselves a mission. Over the course of the evening they was here, they convinced me to send my youngest of 6, my 12-year-old daughter, along with them to be educated. You see, they knew as well as I that her mama being a Shoshone princess and me being a white man, she was not to get a fair education back in the schools of the United States. So that next morning, I reluctantly sent her on ahead to be with them. Later in that fall of 1847, we received word here at Fort Bridger that man and his wife, Dr. Marcus and Narcissa Whitman, had been murdered along with several others at their mission at Willalapoo. Several others were still missing. Among the missing was my wee daughter. To this day, there has never been any sign of her found, and I have spent many weeks in and out of the Walla Wallas, the Cayuses, the Nez Perces, and the Umatillas, seeking for any sign of her or the men responsible for her disappearance. And I suppose it's fortunate for them I have yet to find her captors to this day. But when it comes to seeking justice, old Bill has himself a merchant fellow that can put it into words a little bit more eloquently than I ever could. To bait fish withal. If it will feed nothing, it will feed my revenge. Why, he hath hindered me of $500,000, mocked at my gains, scorned my losses, cooled my friends, and heated mine enemies. And why? What is his reason? Oh, that I am a Jew. Hath not a Jew hands, organs, dimensions, senses, affections, passions, fed with the same food, hurt with the same weapons, subject to the same diseases, healed by the same means, warmed and cooled by the same winter and summer that a Christian is. Why, if you were to prick us, would we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? If you poison us, do we not die? Well, if we are like you in the rest, we shall resemble you in that if a Jew wrong a Christian, what is his humility? Revenge. Well, then if a Christian wrong a Jew, what should his sufferance be by Christian example? Why, revenge. The villainy you teach me, gentlemen, I will execute, and it shall go hard, but I will better the instruction. After seeking justice, the 6th day schist into the lean and slippered pantaloon with spectacles on nose and pouch on side. Now, I don't have me any spectacles to play this next here fella, but imagine, if you will, a lean, hunched over man that's been withered by both time and disease. He has been in his day a lover, a fighter, a soldier, but his true desire now is to one day be king, and he's going to stop at nothing to achieve this ultimate goal. He is to become the hated, and, well, I do mean hated and despised, King Richard III. And now is the winter of our discontent made glorious summer by this son of York, and all the clouds that have lowered upon our house, and now lie deep in the bosom of the ocean buried. Now our stern alarms changed to merry meetings, our bruised arms hung up for merry monuments. Grim-visaged war hath smoothed his wrinkled front, and why now, instead of mounting barbed steeds to fright the souls of fearful adversaries, he doth caper nimbly in a lady's bedchamber to the lascivious pleasings of a lute. But I that am not shaped for sportive tricks, nor made to look upon an amorous looking-glass. I that am too wont love's majesty to strut before a wanton aimly nymph, sent before my time into this cruel, breathing world, scarce half made up, so rudely stamped and curtailed of fair proportion that the dogs do bark at me as I halt by them. Now, to tell you the truth, folks, I could care less for that Richard fella or his story. First time I heard it was Captain J. Lee Humperville reading it to me when we was holed up at Fort Laramie in the winter of 1863. I told Humperville I did not want to hear any more talk of a man who was cruel enough to kill his own mother. And believe it or not, he got even worse before he entered the final stage of a man's life, with spectacles on nose and pouch on side. His youthful hose well saved for a world too wide for his shrunk shank. His big manly voice turning again towards childish treble, bells and whistles in his sound. Last scene of all that ends this strange eventful history is a second childishness and mere oblivion. Sans teeth, sans eyes, sans taste, well, sans everything. know, old Bill wrote himself about another king gone bad, and he spoke about this final stage of a man's life on earth after the untimely death of his wife. He should have died hereafter. Then there would have been time for such a word. Tomorrow, and tomorrow, and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time. And all our yesterdays are belighted fools the way to dusty death. Out, out, brief candle. Life is but a walking shadow, a poor player who struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Well, folks, I do believe it's about time that I am heard no more. I hope you've all enjoyed some storytelling from two of the greatest storytellers ever, leastways in my opinion. You have any questions now about what to take with you? You need a map of where to go next. You feel okay, but nobody knows the territory around here better than me. Thank you very much. My name is Stephan Zacharias. I'm a living history interpreter and performer here at the High Desert Museum. The piece you just witnessed, Jim Bridger and the Bard, is a piece that I wrote with a little help from William Shakespeare after doing some research on American mountain man Jim Bridger. Jim Bridger is a very difficult man to give you a taste of in a short amount of time. In 77 years here on planet Earth, a lot of things. Often I'm asked how come they never made a movie just about him, and that's because, well, in modern terms, you have to take all 6 Star Wars movies and all 3 Lord of the Rings movies, cram them all together. His movie would be longer than that, and I guarantee you they'd still leave stuff out. That would be a very long movie, and so I imagine that's why they have never made it. Bridger started working as a 13-year-old boy in his family's native Virginia as an apprentice blacksmith. Sometime before he turned 14, though, both of his parents pass away, and he's sent on to Missouri to live with his grandparents, where he continues to work as a blacksmith apprentice. By age 16, he's still in Missouri, and he's a full-on blacksmith in his own right. Has all of his own equipment, tools, and a shop there in Missouri. And one day, in the summer of his 16th year, he's visited by a man and a group of men that he is leading. This gentleman was a fellow by the name of Colonel Ashley. Colonel Ashley was leading an overland party to the Pacific Northwest to establish what would become known as the Pacific Fur Trade Company, an American rival to the Hudson Bay Company that was owned by the British. The Pacific Fur Trade Company was owned by a fellow out of the state of New York by the name of John Jacob Astor, a very wealthy man. He hired 2 companies of men to go by land and 1 company to go by sea, and all 3 companies were scheduled to rendezvous on the coast of the Pacific Northwest at the mouth of the Columbia River. Colonel Ashley was so impressed with young Bridger's work that he hires him on. Bridger's a young man who's ready for some adventure, and so he signs up as a member of Colonel Ashley's party as a boatsman, basically a human pack mule and mechanic for the journey. That party does eventually arrive along with the others in the late winter of 1811, early spring of 1812, on what is now the Oregon coast at the mouth of the Columbia River. And in honor of John Jacob Astor, they built a fort for that winter and spring, named it Fort Astoria. It is now Astoria, Oregon today. Bridger fell in love with the Rocky Mountains and the West. He worked his way up quickly through the ranks of the Pacific Fur Trade Company, even by his early 20s, owning in his own right the Rocky Mountain Fur Trade Company, a company that he started. It was only in business for about a year and a half before he sold it then to the Northwest Company, also owned by the British. Bridger could not read or write, but he was able to speak several different languages, as well as about a dozen Native American languages, which enabled him to go freely in and out of territories that other white men weren't so free to do. This enabled him to see many things that nobody else had ever seen before. And Bridger had long been known for his ability to entertain a crowd. At night during rendezvous, he would gather around the campfire after everybody had drinks, and he'd tell stories of his adventures. He would continue this even at his fort in Fort Bridger as Oregon Trail pioneers were coming down the trail. He would tell stories of rivers that ran hot and cold, so hot you could cook meat in them almost instantly just by throwing it in and pulling it back out again. Of holes in the earth that would spew forth hot water and steam hundreds of feet in the air. Of mountains made of glass so clear you could almost see through them. And an arm of the Pacific Ocean that you could walk all the way around because it was completely surrounded by desert. However, Bridger was one of the only white men to ever see these things, so nobody really believed him. They found his stories entertaining, and they referred to him then as a teller of tall tales, which is a very nice way of calling somebody a liar. Bridger eventually gets sick and tired of being told he's nothing but a liar, and he turns, at the advice of an army officer, to William Shakespeare. He hires a young boy, about 13 years old, to read it to him. Pays the young boy $40 a month. That gentleman was doing well for himself at the time. And Bridger learns through a process called oratory recitation. Oratory recitation is the main form of education that is used on the Oregon Trail as well into the rural school systems of Eastern Oregon into the 1930s and 1940s, where sometimes you would have classrooms with students from 5 to 35 years old in that one classroom. Oratory recitation is where somebody assigns you a passage or a monologue from poetry, the Bible, Shakespeare, and by the next day you have to recite it back to them word for word. The way you learn it is you have somebody read it to you, and you repeat each line back to them until you have it all in your brain. This is how you learned on the Oregon Trail. Just because it took sometimes 3 up to 9 months to get here, children did not get out of school. Each night before a meal, or after a meal, you were assigned a passage from the Bible or from Shakespeare or some other form of poetry that you had to recite by the next evening's meal in order to get your meal. If you did not recite it, you didn't get to eat. You went to bed hungry, and the next morning you could try again before breakfast. However, keep in mind that night you would be assigned a new piece to know by the next evening's meal. So